Sturges Karban, CEO, ManifestSeven, on the Dales Report.
All right, we are joined with the CEO of ManifestSeven, Mr. Sturges Karban. How are you?
Good to see you, man.
I know, it's been a long time heading out in California. How's life been over the last 3-4 months?
I tell people that's a pretty loaded question these days. No, it's been a mix of good and bad.
Yeah.
I think on the whole, generally positive. California's been at the forefront of maintaining operational continuity as essential businesses in this space through the crisis, and I think that's adumbrating a lot of very positive things on the horizon for the whole industry.
Yeah,
basically.
that's exciting. Let's first start with you. Harvard grad, capital markets, Boston and New York, heads out to California, gets into the cannabis industry. How'd this all start?
It's funny. I wrote my thesis in college on frontier literature. So I was a 19th century American history and literature specialist and wound up in California about 15 years ago.
Wow.
Presumably pursuing my own manifest destiny. I did a bunch of different things when I first came out here. As you mentioned, I have an investment banking background, primarily out of Boston, and then moved here in 2006. Started a production company at the Warner Brothers lot with a partner. That led to starting a music publishing business with a family office I was heavily involved with for a number of years based out of the UK. Kind of went out on my own right after the last crisis in 2011 and started a boutique merchant bank focused on alternative assets. And, shortly after Colorado went rec and you started to see the mainstreaming effect happening all over the place, pot leaves on the cover of Newsweek and Sanjay Gupta talking about it, it just seemed to make sense to dip my toe into that water that was about as alternative as it got at the time. And I think, like a lot of people, once one toe was in the quicksand, within a matter of a year or two, I was pretty much up to my neck in what I think is probably one of the most explosive and exciting spaces since, the internet.
Yeah, just another average story for a Harvard grad, right?
Yeah, I don't know which I talk about less, the fact that I live in Los Angeles or that I'm a Harvard graduate, depending on the context.
So let's talk about the company, ManifestSeven. So first generic question I want to ask is, how'd you come up with the name and what does ManifestSeven represent?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Thanks for asking about the name. So there we go into my completely unmonetizable Bachelor of Arts degree. I'm a big believer in kind of, the American sensibility that came out of the frontier. California is essentially the apotheosis of that. And, when thinking about kind of the direction this space was heading in, I actually wanted it just to be one word, which was manifest,
okay,
which plays into a lot of things we do. We're a logistics company and a retail company. So, a shipping manifest, so to speak, but more importantly, making what has been a hidden black market, bringing that into the light and making it manifest for everyone. And then, of course, kind of the, allusion to the notion of manifest destiny, which is, the aspirational kind of idealistic principles enshrined in the American value system. And we are fundamentally a California business at the forefront of our own frontier and very much ensconced in those values.
All right. So going public relatively soon, we can touch on that in a bit, but you are one of your components within your business is building a superhighway, otherwise known as like the Amazon of cannabis within the state of California. So a lot of people that I've spoken to recently is, let's face it, this industry, the biggest competitor has always been the black market, but you see more and more companies within the industry that are working amongst each other, working with each other. And a lot of consumers are electing to pick health and wellness, meaning safe products, even if it costs a little bit more before the black market now. So I want to ask, has this in some ways inadvertently helped your business through this whole pandemic the last couple of months?
Yeah, we were already seeing that. So just again, to be clear, we merge a distribution business that's statewide in California and full service. So a long haul kind of commercial platform for enterprises across the entire supply chain. And then we integrate that with an omni-channel retail strategy, the tip of the spear for which is local on-demand delivery, which is basically your fulfillment asset, your mobile asset that allows you to go from the end of the supply chain at the retailer shelves legally to the end user. So all of those issues really are very front and center for us. And, we were seeing this goes back a little bit further, even before COVID, when we had the vape scare towards the end of last year, I was looking at our sales numbers in our retail landscape, and vape sales were increasing. And, right there, you were starting to see some of the organic consumer behavior when you look through that, which is, fundamentally adoption of a regulated industry in this product category is coming, and consumers realize it's not worth the risk of dealing with an unregulated product, probably worth paying what will be a temporary premium, until the rest of the industry kind of right sizes.
Right.
I think has been, just the absolute wild card of wild cards for this space. It certainly in California, as soon as shelter in place mandates came down, it was pretty quickly after that, cannabis business were exempted as essential businesses. So we had operational continuity from the very beginning of the crisis. Being in the retail delivery space under those circumstances, turned out to be a really well thought out strategic choice. We saw a huge spike there. But even in the stores, in our brick and mortar, we had a lot of people, particularly when the shelter in place orders first came down, running out and buying cannabis in the way that they were kind of hoarding toilet paper and Purell.
Yeah.
So key takeaway from all of this is, and investors I think are processing it, is, the demand is increasingly growing. It's growing against cannibalization of the black market as consumers kind of adopt and meet more conventional retail and distribution strategies on the other side of the space. And, we've learned that this is recession proof to a large extent.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going anywhere. And I think all of that bodes well, both for the commercial kind of horizon of the industry, but it's also, I think, at a different level driving, a shift in sensibility at the local, state, and federal level from a regulatory point of view that likely will accelerate, kind of legalization on a state-by-state basis. And I think ultimately that'll generate enough momentum where, this is already now, I think, earlier than we expected on the agenda in the federal discussion, in the federal dialogue nationwide.
Well,
so, while it definitely took everybody by surprise and it made raising capital more difficult, in terms of the underlying fundamentals of the industry, in a lot of ways, this has been a very counterintuitively positive experience for a number of players.
Yeah, there's a lot of CEOs I've spoken to recently. I think it sometimes gets looked over a little bit quick, but just being deemed an essential product was groundbreaking. Obviously, we're in Canada, and obviously we look at things differently. But that's a pretty monumental moment for the industry, obviously in the U.S., is it not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is a government endorsement, effectively, of the space, and also. Again, I mean, we always look top down. You have to look bottom up. The reason for that, right, because politics are still politics, is it reflects, kind of the legislative will of the people that are being governed. It's essential not to the state. It's essential to the consumers that rely on it as medicine or recreation, and that's fair enough. Yeah. So it's also a very organic grassroots indication, I think, as well.
California has always been that darling state, 45 million people, powerful economy, but there's always been an image in the state of California that their biggest competitor is the black market. But there has been a lot of talks, and obviously a lot that have been implemented recently, where you're starting to see a lot of infrastructure built within the state. Maybe give an update to a lot of investors that are looking at you. Obviously, you've got a great model in place, great opportunity within the state of California. But what are some of the changes that are happening within the state to counter against the black market?
Yeah, well, and again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, to a large extent, this being driven as much by the ground up consumer-based, voluntary adoption as it is on enforcement. I think, and you can see the roots of this even 3 years ago. Jeff Sessions would get in front of a microphone and the market would go off 10 points. I think we're starting to realize that the value of enforcement as this industry evolves is going to be to actually support the industry by removing the black market element. But ultimately, the consumers and the operators have to do their part too in this experiment, right? And that means, possibly for the next couple of years, paying a premium on a product, but knowing that it's going to be safer and it's regulated, and allowing that, to really kind of gather critical mass across, the entire consumer base as it grows. So there's that. And then, on the operator side, you're starting to see, I think there have been a lot of operators that have given compliance, kind of the rhetorical lip service it deserves, but it's a very difficult operating environment. California is renowned for it primarily because it's so fragmented from a regulatory perspective and so geographically large. But you are seeing operators voluntarily and proactively start to really focus on the compliance aspect of this, and really kind of terminate their relationship, however tenuous that might be, with the gray and the black market. You look at Weed Maps. They've been actively vetting their listings now to make sure that everyone is actually regulated. That's just that alone, is a huge milestone in the industry. I think what we'll see is a lot of enabling behavior start to dissipate, and that's going to drive, the black market activity down as well. But it's got to be kind of that trifecta. It's got to be enforcement at the top level. It's got to be organic ground up adoption by the consumer, and then ultimately responsible operating by the enterprises.
Yeah. Well, we're in an industry where there's lots of restrictions and limits as to what you can and can't market. And what I found really fascinating about your story is that you were actually able to buy the 1-800-cannabis number from a private investor. That in itself, what an incredible marketing tool, obviously, for people to identify your company with a number like that really simplifies things. And does that provide a big advantage for you when it comes to moving product?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, in the first instance, right now, that's because we have to do everything state by state. It's fundamentally, dedicated on our California retail landscape. And I joke oftentimes that, the reason I love that asset is because it's so intuitive, even the most habitual cannabis user can remember it. But more than that, the kind of the marketing tool that it represents, it's also, the DNA of it is it's geocentrically agnostic. So it exists right now in California, but it exists in such a way that it doesn't really matter where you're calling from in California, in the same way that you would order a car on Uber. Right. And ultimately, that's a principle apply as we roll out across additional states and ultimately into a full-blown domestic business. It's a geocentrically agnostic order from anywhere, fulfill from anywhere tool. And, ultimately, if you look through that, it's anticipating the fact that it will be a nationwide, if not a global business.